I used to check the apartment cameras for entertainment more than security. It was a small ritual I never told anyone about, something I did between emails or while waiting for spreadsheets to load. Watching my wife shuffle around in oversized sleep shirts, debating with the cat like he was a stubborn coworker, or abandoning half-finished mugs of tea in rooms she'd never re-enter. It was my private comedy show. That morning, I opened the app expecting exactly that. Instead, within seconds, I felt something inside me split cleanly in two. My name is Rowan Halpern. I was 39 at the time, a regional supply chain analyst based in Seattle, Washington. I had been married for 7 years to a woman I believed was named Elise Morgan, a freelance illustrator who claimed she did her best creative work between midnight and sunrise. She had quirks I adored, routines I memorized without trying. That Thursday, she stopped me just before I left for work, fingers lightly gripping the sleeve of my jacket. "You're tied up late tonight, right?" she asked, casual tone, soft smile. I told her yes, probably until 9. She kissed my cheek, warm and unhurried. I walked out believing I understood my life. What I didn't mention to her was that the building's internal security cameras had finally been repaired the previous evening after nearly 2 weeks offline. Faulty wiring, a property manager who moved at the pace of erosion, and a contractor who'd finished the job while I was stuck in meetings. Elise had texted me, "All fixed now." At 9:42 a.m., seated at my desk surrounded by the low hum of 20 coworkers, I opened the app for a 30-second glance. The screen buffered, then cleared. The image that appeared did not match the life I thought I was living. She wasn't in pajamas. She wasn't sketching or reheating coffee or arguing with the cat. She was standing at our open front door. A man I had never seen before stepped inside carrying a folded canvas bag that looked intentionally empty. Elise glanced down both sides of the corridor before closing the door. The movement was quick, practiced, precise. No hesitation, no surprise. She gestured toward our bedroom without speaking, and he moved in that direction as if following a blueprint already memorized. I froze, eyes locked on the tiny screen, heart thudding in a way that made the world around me recede. 4 seconds passed. Then I picked up my phone and dialed emergency services. I kept my voice low, leaning toward my collar so my colleagues wouldn't hear the tremor threatening to expose me. I told the dispatcher I was watching a live feed from my apartment and that an unknown man had entered. The question came swiftly, "Is your wife in danger?" I watched the screen again. Elise walked into the bedroom behind him. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't reaching for a phone. She opened the closet herself and began pulling down storage boxes from the top shelf, handing them to him methodically, like someone assisting with a planned move. "No," I said slowly. "She's helping him." The silence on the other end stretched. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it automatically, still staring at the feed as if looking away might change what I was seeing. The man moved through the bedroom with deliberate care. He opened drawers without rummaging, lifted items without scattering them, avoided touching surfaces unnecessarily. He went straight for the small fireproof case on the upper shelf, the one I accessed once every few months. He didn't pry it open. He didn't examine it. He simply placed it into the canvas bag as if he already knew exactly what it contained. That detail pierced deeper than anything else. He knew. Which meant she had told him. A coworker approached my desk mid-crisis to remind me about a conference call. I looked up, and whatever expression crossed my face must have been enough to stop further questions. I told her to cancel it. 23 minutes after the man entered, he exited with the bag now visibly weighted. Elise checked the hallway again before opening the door. Then she hugged him, not romantically, not urgently. It was the embrace of co-conspirators who had just completed a successful operation. The camera caught the final angle of his face before he disappeared down the corridor. My attention snapped back to the lockbox. He hadn't forced it. The key for it usually stayed on my key ring. I checked my pocket. The small steel key was missing. I couldn't remember when I'd last noticed it there. The case contained nothing dramatic by itself. Emergency cash, my passport, the title to my vehicle, a gold pocket watch passed down from my great uncle, and documents related to my late mother's estate, finalized just a month earlier. Separately, they were objects. Together, they were leverage. My phone buzzed with a message from Elise. "The cat just knocked over my paint water again. Studio chaos. You laugh." I stared at the message until the letters blurred. She was texting me mundane updates while orchestrating something precise enough to require timing and planning. I replied with a neutral joke, buying silence. Then I opened my banking apps. Joint checking appeared unchanged. Savings unchanged. Then I opened the private account I maintained quietly, an account built over years as a buffer against uncertainty. The most recent transaction was from the previous afternoon, a wire transfer of $19,860. I didn't recognize the receiving account. My pulse spiked. I scrolled backward. 3 additional transfers over the last 2 months. $5,200, $7,900, $3,750. Incremental, strategic, large enough to matter, small enough to avoid triggering immediate suspicion. She hadn't acted impulsively yesterday. She had been executing something gradual and controlled for weeks. I left the office without explanation. I sat in my car in the underground parking structure with the engine off and replayed the footage repeatedly. Entry, closet, case, exit, hug, 23 minutes and 14 seconds. 7 years of marriage compressed into less than half an hour. I contacted my bank's fraud department from the driver's seat. After 8 minutes on hold listening to synthetic piano music, a representative answered. I explained calmly that multiple transfers were unauthorized. She reviewed the account and then informed me the transactions had been authenticated using my login credentials, PIN and security questions, initiated from a device connected to our home Wi-Fi network. Elise's laptop. She hadn't hacked anything. She had observed, memorized, waited. I instructed the representative to freeze every account immediately. She complied. When the call ended, something inside me hardened into clarity. That morning she hadn't asked about my schedule out of affection. She had been confirming her operational window. She believed she had nearly 8 uninterrupted hours. I checked the time. 10:58 a.m. She thought I wouldn't return until late evening, which meant I had the day to uncover who she truly was before she realized anything had gone wrong. I drove not to my apartment, not to the police station, but to someone who specialized in uncovering buried truths. My longtime friend Nolan Pierce ran a discreet investigative consultancy from Tacoma. We met in graduate school, and over the years I'd referred clients to him without ever imagining I'd one day sit across from him as one. He opened his door, studied my face for 2 seconds, and stepped aside silently. I showed him the footage. He watched without comment, rewound twice, paused on the man's posture and hand placement. "That's not opportunistic theft," he said finally. "That's targeted retrieval." He pointed out the calculated avoidance of unnecessary surfaces, the direct movement toward specific storage areas. He knew what he was collecting. Nolan asked what was inside the case. I listed the contents. When I mentioned my passport, he leaned back slightly. "Where was Elise born?" he asked. "Colorado," I answered automatically. He began typing. Databases I didn't recognize flickered across his screen. He entered her full legal name and birth date. We waited. The search returned nothing, not limited results. Nothing. He tried variations, different spellings, cross-state records, still nothing. The social security number from our joint tax filings existed, but it belonged to a girl who had died in 2005 at age 14. Nolan's voice remained level. "You've been living with someone using a deceased minor's identity." The term he used was one I'd never heard before: identity layering, building a life on dormant credentials left behind by someone who never reached adulthood. Clean credit history, minimal digital footprint, reconstructed documentation. It required patience and access. "This wasn't spontaneous," Nolan said. "She had this infrastructure before she met you." My mind replayed the past 7 years under a new lens. Small inconsistencies I had dismissed, vague explanations, reluctance to discuss childhood details in depth. Nolan asked about my mother's estate. The documents were stored at home. He advised against returning alone. Instead, he contacted Detective Harold Kessler, someone he'd collaborated with on financial crime investigations. I explained everything to the detective in one continuous account. He asked for a recent photograph. I sent a clear still from the hallway camera. A pause followed. "We know her," he said carefully. "Multiple aliases, ongoing investigations in 2 states, fraud, identity theft, estate manipulation." The name I knew was not her first, nor her second. She had a documented pattern of targeting individuals recently connected to inheritance or asset consolidation. My mother's estate had made me visible. While we spoke, law enforcement units were dispatched to my apartment. Detective Kessler asked whether she had access to a separate vehicle. She did. A compact sedan registered under her name. He ran the plate. It had been flagged by traffic cameras near SeaTac Airport less than 20 minutes earlier. Terminal D International Departure. 1 carry-on bag, likely containing my passport as supplemental identification. The precision of it made my chest ache. She had planned a seamless exit. assuming the digital transfers would go unnoticed for days, perhaps weeks. Her associate was apprehended shortly after at a shipping center attempting to send certified copies of my mother's estate paperwork to an address in Nevada. I wasn't present at the airport when she was detained. I sat in Nolan's kitchen staring at a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, waiting for confirmation. When the call came mid-afternoon, "We have her," the words felt surreal. The woman I had loved had never existed in the way I believed. Her legal name, as established through federal records, was Lydia Voss, 44 years old, a decade-long trail of constructed identities, 7 confirmed victims before me, carefully selected targets, often professionals with stable assets and recent inheritances. She specialized in gradual financial siphoning combined with strategic document extraction. During the investigation, authorities recovered most of the transferred funds and the contents of my lockbox. The only missing item was a small amount of cash, insignificant compared to what might have been lost. I testified months later during the trial. Sitting across the courtroom from her, I finally recognized the expression she wore so often during our marriage. It wasn't affection or irritation or even deception in the theatrical sense. It was assessment, constant evaluation, measuring utility. She was sentenced to a substantial prison term. Her associate received less. I reclaimed my documents, my watch, my passport, but reclamation doesn't restore perception. Some nights I still hear her voice asking about my work schedule with casual warmth. I once believed love provided safety. What I learned instead is that trust, when unexamined, can become the exact mechanism someone else uses to dismantle you quietly and efficiently. In the weeks that followed her arrest, the silence inside my apartment felt heavier than the betrayal itself. Every object had become evidence, every corner a reminder of how thoroughly my life had been studied without my awareness. The detectives returned the contents of the fireproof case in a clear plastic bag marked with inventory codes and signatures. My passport lay on top, slightly bent at one corner, as if it had been handled without reverence. Beneath it, the vehicle title, the estate documents bearing my mother's name, and the gold watch wrapped in one of Elise's old scarves. I held the watch longer than necessary, feeling the grooves worn into its casing by generations before me. I kept replaying the footage in my mind, not because I needed proof anymore, but because my brain kept searching for hesitation in her movements, some flicker of doubt that would make her human again. There was none. The efficiency of that 23-minute operation had been the purest expression of who she truly was. Investigators walked me through her history in fragments over several meetings. She had used at least 5 verified identities across 4 states over the last decade. Each time she embedded herself in a stable life, built credibility, then waited for the right financial trigger, a business sale, an inheritance, a settlement payout. The pattern was chilling in its patience. I wasn't chosen at random. I had been profiled long before I ever knew she existed. The forensic accountants reconstructed the digital trail she left behind. The incremental transfers from my private account were routed through layered intermediary accounts before landing in an offshore holding structure tied to shell corporations. She hadn't acted alone in the broader sense. There was a network, facilitators who created documentation, contacts who sourced dormant social security numbers, individuals who specialized in clean credit construction. It was an ecosystem built around invisibility. The man from the footage, identified as Mateo Ibarra, had a record that spanned wire fraud, document falsification, and asset laundering. He had been under surveillance intermittently for years, but never long enough to secure a conviction that stuck. My case provided the connective tissue authorities had been missing. What unsettled me most was learning that she had adjusted timelines when necessary. In 2 previous cases, she remained married for nearly 9 years before initiating extraction. She adapted to her target's habits, income patterns, and emotional vulnerabilities. I began to question every shared memory, every anniversary trip, every late-night conversation about future plans. Were those moments rehearsed? Or was there some microscopic fragment of sincerity buried within the performance? The investigators advised me not to dwell there. Motive, they said, was financial leverage combined with psychological control. Attachment was simulated because simulation was profitable. Friends circled cautiously during that period, unsure how to speak about her without detonating something fragile inside me. Some expressed anger on my behalf, others expressed embarrassment that they had liked her. I reassured them mechanically. The truth was more complicated. I missed the version of her I thought existed. I missed the domestic rituals, the way she hummed while making tea, the exaggerated arguments with the cat, the habit of leaving half-finished sketches across the dining table. Nolan suggested that part of the con relied on creating harmless eccentricities. They made her feel authentic, memorable, irreplaceable. Investigators later confirmed she maintained detailed journals on her targets, notes about preferences, anxieties, routines. She mirrored interests strategically. If a previous partner enjoyed hiking, she became an outdoor enthusiast. With me, she learned enough about logistics and global trade to hold convincing conversations at work events. I realized how many times I had interpreted her curiosity as love. In reality, it had been research. The prosecutors prepared me for trial by walking through potential defense strategies. She might argue emotional coercion by her associate. She might claim the transfers were misunderstandings between spouses. None of it materialized. When confronted with overwhelming digital and physical evidence, she shifted to silence. Her expression in the courtroom remained calm, almost analytical, as if she was studying a case study rather than living inside its consequences. During testimony, I described the morning I checked the camera. I detailed the missing key, the hug at the door, the message about the cat. The jurors watched the footage without sound. You could see the shift in their posture when the lockbox entered the bag. That small, unremarkable container carried more weight than any spoken accusation. The prosecution presented financial records charting the progression of withdrawals, mapping them visually to show the deliberate escalation. The defense attempted to suggest marital financial discretion, but the use of layered accounts and falsified credentials dismantled that argument quickly. When the verdict arrived, guilty on multiple counts including identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, and grand larceny, I felt no triumph, only a quiet recalibration. Sentencing followed weeks later. The judge referenced the pattern of calculated exploitation and the psychological damage inflicted on victims who often blamed themselves long after the money was returned. She received a sentence measured in double digits. Mateo received slightly less due to a negotiated cooperation agreement. As she was escorted from the courtroom, she glanced at me once, not pleading, not apologetic, evaluating. It struck me then that even conviction did not alter her internal framework. Consequences were variables, not moral events. Recovery was procedural but not instantaneous. Financial institutions restored the majority of siphoned funds once fraud was formally established. Credit bureaus scrubbed inquiries and temporary dips in my score. Legal fees were partially reimbursed through asset seizure from her network. On paper, I was made whole. In practice, I had to relearn ordinary trust. I replaced the locks in my apartment, then eventually moved altogether. I changed passwords, enabled multi-factor authentication on everything, and installed redundant security systems I actually monitored. Yet the deeper adjustment was internal. I examined how easily I had accepted the absence of verifiable history because the present felt comfortable. I had never met extended family members. I had accepted vague explanations about estranged relatives. I had filled in narrative gaps with optimism. Therapists later helped me untangle that instinct. Love encourages narrative completion. When pieces are missing, we supply them generously. She had relied on that generosity. In sessions, I was asked whether there had been red flags. I listed small inconsistencies, reluctance to discuss childhood friends, avoidance of shared financial planning beyond surface details, subtle deflection when asked about long-term joint investments. None of them alone justified suspicion. Together, in hindsight, they formed a faint outline I had chosen not to trace. Months passed before the apartment felt like a space rather than a crime scene. I kept the gold watch in a different drawer but still wound it weekly. I opened a new savings account under stricter monitoring. Professionally, I continued my work in supply chain analysis, though I noticed a shift in how I evaluated risk. I became more meticulous, more skeptical of unchecked assumptions. Colleagues attributed it to maturity. They didn't know it was recalibration. Nolan once told me that surviving deception doesn't automatically make someone cynical. It can make them precise. That word stayed with me. Precision in questions, precision in documentation, precision in boundaries. I no longer dismissed curiosity about someone's past as distrust. Transparency became a prerequisite rather than a luxury. When acquaintances asked what I learned, I struggled to compress it into something conversational. The easiest answer was that fraud doesn't always look chaotic. Sometimes it looks like shared grocery lists and inside jokes. It looks like someone asking about your work schedule with affectionate concern, while timing your absence down to the minute. The cat, oblivious to everything human, resumed his routines within days of her disappearance. Animals don't question identity, they respond to presence. Watching him curl into the same patch of sunlight she once occupied stirred complicated emotions. I kept expecting a message, some final manipulation attempt from a detention center phone line, but none came. Investigators informed me she rarely contacted former targets once apprehended. There was no strategic advantage. That detachment may have been the final confirmation that whatever I had felt was never mutual in structure, only in performance. Over time, I began speaking with 2 other confirmed victims. Confidentiality agreements limited specifics, but patterns emerged. Each of us had experienced a period of apparent domestic normalcy followed by gradual financial leakage. Each of us had been asked subtle questions about schedules and document storage in the weeks preceding extraction. Hearing their stories reframed mine. I wasn't uniquely foolish. I was part of a design sequence. That realization didn't absolve me of responsibility for vigilance, but it removed the corrosive layer of shame. A year after sentencing, I stood at my apartment window one evening watching planes trace faint arcs across the sky toward distant cities. I thought about the airport camera that had captured her final attempted departure, about how close she had come to vanishing cleanly. If the building wiring had taken one more week to repair, if I hadn't opened the app that morning, the story would have ended differently. She would have boarded, documents in her bag, funds transferred incrementally until discovery felt too late. I would have returned home to an empty closet and an explanatory note crafted to misdirect. That alternate timeline exists in my imagination sometimes, a version where doubt replaces evidence and closure never arrives. Instead, the disruption happened mid-operation. The truth surfaced in real time. I don't consider that luck as much as interruption. Fraud thrives on uninterrupted narratives. That morning, a restored camera feed fractured hers. People occasionally ask whether I'll remarry. The question no longer unsettles me. Trust, I've learned, is not blindness. It is a decision accompanied by verification. Love does not require ignorance of documentation. If anything, genuine connection welcomes clarity. I still believe in partnership, but I believe in it with open eyes. The watch remains wound. The accounts remain monitored. My work continues. Some nights I replay her final question in my memory, soft, almost tender. You'll be late, right? It was a line delivered flawlessly, engineered for reassurance. I once heard affection in it. Now I hear calculation layered beneath warmth. And yet, despite everything, I don't regret loving fully. What I regret is mistaking consistency of performance for authenticity of character. The difference between the two is subtle until it is. When it reveals itself, it does so in minutes, sometimes exactly 23 of them, reshaping years in the space of a single uninterrupted feed.